Okay, Valentina, we are live.
Great. Hi. Hello.
Hi,
Hi, everyone. Hi,
hi,
Vincent.
hi. How are you? First of all,
I'm good. Great.
so where are you now? I mean, we know that I know that you were traveling for a while in these last weeks, crazy weeks. But where are you now?
Well, I'm currently in Beijing at Beijing office of CastBox. I was on quarantine for 15 days after I arrived from Moscow. So I stayed on quarantine in Tianjin, and I was released from quarantine last week and back to the office already.
Okay, release is uh, like an
Yeah,
arrest.
what's happening in China currently is that there are no internal cases anymore. So all the cases with the virus are from the people who are traveling, who are returning from the overseas. So, and government imposed very strict regulations for them to pass the quarantine. So, we my flight was to Beijing, but we were not allowed to land in Beijing, and the flights were redirected to Tianjin. It was at the end of March. So yeah, and then we landed and we went through inspection, and then all together we were on the bus, and then they put us in one hotel. So basically, when you are on quarantine, it's very strict. You're locked in your room. You're not allowed to go out. You cannot talk to whoever else. You can't talk to your neighbors. So yeah, I just stayed locked in a room. So probably similar to what you're experiencing at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was not. It was okay. I cannot complain. So yeah, and after that, at the end, we were tested, received our health certificates, and yeah, then
Yeah, I will ask some details more in few minutes. Uh,
okay,
so since we met the first time in Moscow in I think 2015 or 2016,
yeah,
I
many
can't
years
remember.
ago,
Yeah, many years ago. Uh, you move a bit your life. Can you a bit introduce yourself for our listener, for our uh, people that is watching us.
right. So when we met at that time, I was working at the executive search and HR consulting firm. So we were headhunting for top managers, for highly qualified professionals, and we were giving different types of advice to our clients on how to reshape the teams, how to implement internal educational systems, how to train the leaders, so on and so forth. And yeah, I was in that business for more than 7 years, and at the same time, it was my dream to do an MBA. So at the end, I decided, okay, now it's time to apply for a business school. And finally, I got admitted to one of the top business schools in
But
the
how
world.
came up? How
Yeah.
came up China? I mean, everybody dream. I don't know, some business MBA in the US and the UK or some in Europe. How came the idea to move to China?
It took me some time to decide, actually. So I was traveling around, and I was trying to visit all the top schools. So I went to LBS, I went to INSEAD in France, I went to Harvard, and yeah, and then I was trying to compare, my impressions of those schools. I tried to sit in class and talk to professors and talk to the students. And then I realized that European and basically all the Western schools are they are very understandable for me because I have been working for the UK company, and previously I did my master's in France, for example. So UK
So
and France.
a bit old-fashioned for you.
It's not old-fashioned. It was just very familiar. It was like very. It was my comfort zone, you know. But I used to work with many Western clients, so it was very. You know, it was nothing. I mean, it just comparison, you know. When I went to Shanghai, when I went to CEIBS first time, it was a very different feeling. When I was in a class, I realized that I just have no idea what is the professor is talking about. You know, I have no idea. I never heard of any of these companies, you know. So, and when I compared my impressions after being in Harvard class, for example, and after being in CEIBS class, for example, it was just, you know.
How long? I'm a foreigner, like in Moscow already nearly 10 years. I lost the count, and it took for me some time to adjust to the Moscow way to do the language, or I mean culture and so on. How you get the contact? I mean, in China. I mean, how you felt? How you let me say, how long it took for you to adaptate to Chinese life?
It's a
this is
question.
Interesting, like, because I mean, it took for me at least 6 months in Moscow to understand where I am, because I was a bit in, let me say, living in the center. I was protected, no? But then when I explored the other part of Moscow, when I have to leave the top center, so I felt a bit like, okay, I left my comfort zone, let me say. And so I want to understand the process, but from your point of view and from another country.
Right. Well, I really admire those people who travel and who, you know, relocate to a new country. Well, I'm sure it was challenging for you, but probably China is a little bit more difficult than you know, being in a European country, because the culture is completely different, and we have so many differences in traditions, in the way how we interact, and obviously the language is challenging. So I started to learn Chinese about 2 years in advance before I moved to China, actually, but it was still not enough. You know, my Chinese is still not perfect. So yeah, I still.
But you can survive.
Yeah, definitely. I can survive. I can travel. I can talk to my neighbors. I can talk to the drivers. But still, I think it's better, you know, if someone wants to relocate to China, or if someone wants to work in China, it's better to start way in advance, you know, a few years in advance, to prepare and to learn the language at least.
Yeah, of course. I still have a friend in Moscow, 15 years living here, and still resist without knowing Russian language. I don't know how he can resist, but I mean, I think that China, of course, is a bit different because it's a more, let me say, closed culture, no? So I think that you have to break the wall of this culture. So you have to adaptate more than in Russia or any other countries. So, but okay, you succeed in your MBA. So I was following you. I mean, in this experience, I saw you very happy. I mean, also with your mates, with your course mates, classmates. But so you have a background of journalist, yeah? So your I think first education is in journalism. So how you felt to move to CastBox, and how came up the decision to move from HR executive to CastBox?
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, indeed, I studied journalism and I worked as a journalist at the very beginning of my career for probably 5 years altogether. So it was not a new field for me, but I haven't been in the industry for quite a bit. And when I was in HR consulting previously, I have been working for different industries, not only media, not only tech, but also, some very traditional. So I had to learn a lot from scratch. So yeah, and transferring to the world of new media, transferring to the world of a mobile app, it's completely, I would say it's the whole different universe comparing to the world of traditional media.
Yeah, because the podcast is experiencing the phenomenal explosion nowadays. So I'm podcasting since let me say July, August. I decided to challenge myself in podcasting because I had a short experience in radio when I was more than a teenage. So I was a journalist, but focusing more on sport, basketball. So I say, okay, why not? I'm a professor, so I can, or at least I try to explain some concept. Why not to podcast? And my experience in podcasting was my targets were my students, because I wanted to give some extra content that during the classroom, for example, I couldn't provide them. So for shortage of time and so on. So and then I say, okay, cool, and I try to buy more equipment, better, like I call a microphone, a console. So I start to enjoy it. But I saw that this is not a new phenomenon. So, and I remember when you told me, like, you commented under one of my podcasts, say, why you don't share your podcast on CastBox? And I say, CastBox? What is CastBox? Because I knew only Spotify or Spreaker or I don't know Apple Podcast, because I was following a few channels. So, can you explain to us how exploded this phenomenon of podcast and of course CastBox?
Right. So I'm glad to hear that you know Spreaker, obviously because they're coming from Italy. Yeah, the Spreaker is a great company as well. So, but we are different. We are not in the same niche as Spreaker, because Spreaker is focusing mostly on the hosting services.
Yeah, so, I use for that.
Yeah, exactly. But CastBox, we are in a slightly different niche. So we are a podcast app for final users. We are targeting mostly, end users, and it's no wonder that you're familiar with Spotify or Apple, because they are major players on this market. But CastBox is an app for listening to podcasts, number 3 in the world. So we have about 5% market share. We are way behind Apple and Spotify, obviously, but we are number 1 among independent players. And indeed, the podcast market, the industry is growing, and on the West is doubles its size, pretty much previous couple of years. And the forecasts, before the crisis and the whole virus outbreak, it was the forecasts were like super positive, so the industry is this particular segment of the media industry is the most promising out of, if you compare other media segments. So yeah, and this segment is super new, is super recent. So the industry didn't exist until 2014, and once Apple implemented their own app on the iPhone, and then a few shows came to stage, such as Serial, for example. So since 2014, the industry just keep growing.
Can you tell me what's the most listened content on CastBox? News, storytelling, or entertainment? I saw that some friend of mine is moving in these days from face to face, from offline comedy to podcast, stand-up comedy. Let me say it like this. So, what's the most search content on CastBox?
Well, you can, if you're interested to see more search content, you should download the app, and
I have.
You have it. Okay, and then if you go to the search bar, you can see, because we disclose what people are currently searching for, and you will see the keywords, and we update them pretty often, so you will see what people are interested in. So I would say the categories are, people are interested in entertainment podcasts, obviously, in comedy, and also we have quite a bit of interest to the business-related content, from the renowned media outlets such as, Financial Times, The Economist, but basically we have, we probably have a very balanced interest to the categories. So I can't really tell you that, for example, content about psychology is performing, much better than other categories, because we have, we have balanced interest.
Yeah, of course. But do you think that mainstream podcasts, because now, for example, BBC, CNN, or in my sector, even Politico.eu or other giants are occupying share of the market, no? How independent, according to your point of view, no? Because you are a BDB, so business development, on CastBox for Europe, if I'm not mistaken. How independent, let me say, content makers can take a share of the market against, let me say, can compete with, with BBC or with mainstream content maker.
Mm-hmm. Coming just to add to the previous question, I have to say, you asked about which categories and which topics are performing better, and I have to say that it really varies from market to market. So it's really difficult to generalize, because even in Europe, if you take two big countries such as France and Germany, and you will see that the topics that are most listened to, they are quite different. So in Germany, probably one of the most listened topic will be true crime, but in France it's everything related to feminism or to female entrepreneurship or to sexuality. So it really varies from country to country. So I'm happy to comment on the country preferences later. But you asked me about independent creators.
Somebody like me, let me say, or small companies, no, small firm.
Right. So it's very challenging to be an independent podcaster, to be honest with you. So, I mean, if you have already your audience somewhere else on Instagram or on Facebook or on Twitter, you can motivate these people to follow you or to follow your podcast. It will be much easier for you to gain the listeners. But if you're starting completely from scratch, you have to, to talk to platforms and to ask for featuring. You can try to ask them to include you into special categories on the homepage. So do various things that will happen for discoverability. And also you can try to do cross promotion with other podcasters. So yeah, there are many ways you can find various recommendations on the internet. But what is challenging, what I particularly think is challenging for the small podcasters is it's difficult to monetize.
Yeah,
so,
I know.
right? So it's you probably want to.
My checkbook is still in minus. I mean, but okay, I do it for fun, but I would like to see some plus. So.
Right. So, I mean, again, this is challenging to monetize. So there are a few ways. If you're doing your show, if you target very specific audience, narrow, niche audience, you can try to talk to advertisers and to offer them, if they are interested. If you're talking about, I don't know, let's say. If you're talking about politics or some educational content, you probably can, try to pitch to advertisers who are selling some products, some educational products. So yeah, it's really challenging. What people do on the developed markets, so what people do in the US, they try to, create networks. So, for example, if you know other podcasters that are targeting the same audience, you probably can try to create a network, and then you can have. So it will, it will just make it easier for you to sell ads because you can, target. It will just give you economy of scale. So you can target the advertiser, and then you can offer to the advertiser your audience of your friend A, audience of your friend B, who are probably talking, creating content on similar topics.
Yeah, I was discussing these things yesterday with a friend of mine that is trying to explore also the world of podcasting, but for high tech, so for specific audience, no? And he's an IT, so he was trying to ask me how I'm doing in the podcasting world, no? So technology that I need. So and he said, but if we create a network of few of us showing maybe even different content, but we create a network of us, we can a bit challenge the measures or the mainstream, because of course we can reduce the cost, for example, for the platform. For example, I pay a fee, to Spreaker to get some additional content, for example, or for the platform if you are for the console and so on. So yes, I agree with you on this point. Maybe also one of my mistakes that I would like to share with you, that I'm delivering content in two languages. So I have two series, one in English, that this is this one 1984, and another in Italian, because let me say, not all my Italian followers, so they could reach my content in English, because it's not like a movie, that you can set up subtitle. It's not Netflix, that you use subtitle and you can understand what's going on. So the podcast is also a bit particular. So if you have, let me say, an audience that's use different languages is also more difficult. No, I was asked to do it in Russian, but I say, guys, 3 languages could be impossible to manage. Free platform, 3 different content, so it's quite impossible. So I decided to keep English and Italian, because I mean.
By the way, yeah, did you hear the podcast Britalian?
No.
It's an Italian guy creating a podcast in English. I'll share the link with you later. So
okay, would be interesting.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah. So I know it's very challenging. So yeah, bravo. You know, if you are doing 2 languages already, it's super challenging.
Yeah.
What's easier for you? What's easier for you?
I mean, both. Let me say that Italian sometimes becoming very difficult because I speak Italian not that often as before. Yeah. So I think in English or in Russian after 10 years working in English and in Russian. So sometimes I have to really concentrate to think back in Italian. So it's not that easy. But of course, I have a guest. Cool guest, Italian guest, so friends of mine, colleagues, or some expert that, of course, help me in this challenge, you know, to come back on my comfort zone in Italian language, let me say. So it's because sometimes it's challenging also. But I have a question. I mean, CastBox is, as you say before, no, off of the records, global-born company platform, but of course was originally born in China. How popular is the podcast in China?
Well, it's a great question, and I probably have to explain here because it can be confusing a little bit. So I wouldn't say CastBox was born in China, because we never had any business in China. So CastBox is an open platform, and as many other open platforms, we are blocked in China. So it's the same way as Facebook or Instagram. So yeah, and CastBox started its operations in the US right away, and that's why, you know, out of 30 million users that we have, half of the users are in the US and 30% are in Europe. So but you asked me about podcasting in China, and obviously I'm in touch with some of the local podcasters, because I spend a lot of time here in Beijing, and we interact with local people who are involved in the podcasting business. And in China, it's really popular to listen to podcasts, but it's very specific. It's less scripted podcast. It's less it's less audio drama. It's less narrative podcast, but more sort of lectures, because it's I know from my Chinese classmates who studied together with me in an MBA class. We were doing full-time MBA for almost 2 years, and they were still listening to podcasts about business, about economics, about history. And I asked them, guys, we're studying here in the business school for full-time. Why you're still need this additional content? And they are saying, well, we are like sort of.
It's a way of comparing, maybe. So because even studying from one source is not enough. I mean, being like a professor, I still keep studying on daily basis, because I'm trying to compare what I know or what other people say. So maybe
that's true. That's true. And also I would say it's also a habit, because it's very competitive. The whole higher education is super competitive. If in Europe we consider that competition, if you have 10 people applying for one vacancy, at the to get a bachelor's degree, but here in China is 100 people applying for one vacancy, and this is competitive here. So it's like different scale.
Another question that I would like to ask, because we have like a discussion with friends that are also doing podcasts, as I said before. What is on the market now? A long content podcast or short content podcast? Because somebody was telling that now in US, in Europe, is back this tendency of long content podcast. So 45 minutes, an hour. So people spend time to listen to a podcast. But before, maximum, let me say 20 minutes, 15 minutes, and people to say, okay, I'm off. I'm tired. So let's start now.
Well, I would say it's already another trend is arising. And last year, people were talking that very short form is booming. So such as 5 minutes, 7 minutes episodes. But you're right. Nobody is listening to 2 hours podcast anymore. Only probably geeks, but it's not a mainstream.
Only me during my training of 3 or 4
Yeah, this is, there is a joke also, if you want to keep a secret, just put it in your podcast after 1 hour, because say it in your podcast after 60 minutes. So this means that nobody's listening for such a long episode. Yeah, so I would say we don't see, I would still say that it has to be reasonable. The length of the episode has to be reasonable. So, and the traditional pattern, the normal pattern when people are listening to podcasts is when they commute. So morning and evening commute, and also, training in a gym, not marathon, so, and normally people do commute for like 30, 40 minutes, and they do training for less than 1 hour. So yeah, this is,
the new trend.
Yeah, it has to be reasonable again.
Yeah, I try to keep not more than 45 minutes. But sometimes when you have more than one guest, it's very difficult because everybody wants to say something more. So I try to keep, when I have more than one guest, maximum 1 hour. But I try to concentrate the hot news, the most important information in the first part, just to keep the audience focused. So before to, let me say, steal more time and to overgo the new tendency of podcast, because we are already 34, 35 minutes that we are live. Of course, everybody may be interested about the situation in China, no? So the outbreak already is over. So it seems so. Few cases maybe imported from abroad, as you were telling in the beginning. So can you give like a snapshot about COVID-19 situation in China nowadays?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's coming back to normal. As you can see, I'm back to the office, so people are allowed to go to the office more or less, but we still, I'm currently in the meeting room because we still need to keep the safe distance, because the local authorities, they don't allow us to sit closely to each other. And also we wear masks when we talk to each other. And we have certain precautions, and you still have to keep distance when you're going to the supermarket, so on and so forth. But I have to say that from what I can see here, the strict quarantine, it was very efficient. So it depends on the city, but it was probably from 6 to 8 weeks of and even more of strict quarantine, when people were not allowed, to go out, when people mostly stayed at their houses. So and I think so in Beijing is probably I don't know, roughly 70% back to normal. In Shanghai, it's probably 80% back to normal. And companies are coming. Still, it's not full capacity, but and last week in Beijing, from what I saw, the cafes started to reopen, and this week public events are starting to be allowed. So I know that.
But at full capacity, you mean public events? I don't know, sport events, or what do you mean?
It's difficult for me to say, right? Because I only can comment what I was able to see with my own eyes. So I was just back to to the normal life last week, and I didn't see much yet. So for example, when I was staying on quarantine in Tenzing, I was watching the construction, which was just in front of, besides my hotel window. And from what I saw, it was construction started and people were working 24 hours. But I think they only allowed limited amount of people to be on the construction site. So people were working at shifts, but still they had to maintain the distance.
So let me ask just the last question, and then really I will let you go. Do you think, from your point of view, this can be the new normal? So we can consider social distancing, or I don't know, not work at full capacity. So divide, for example, in different shifts the workers and so on. A new normal. Because you are experiencing something similar to China. And China was, let me say, the precursor, so the first country that experienced such situation. So now it can be an example, as Italy may be an example in Europe.
I don't think it's a new normal. What I really think is that some extra measures are in place, and this is correct to do so. This is a good thing to take extra precautions because the virus is new. So basically, scientists, they don't have enough data. They don't have enough information to judge if we became resistant to it, or if somebody, who had the virus became immune to it. So we just have basically no information on that. So I think it probably, I'm not a scientist whatsoever, but I think it will take time for scientists to observe all the cases, to gather enough data, and to make forecasts. So until all this work is completed, we will be keeping social distancing and wearing masks for some time.
Okay, the mask is not something new for Chinese, because they always had to wear it. So several, in all the Asian countries, so they try to wear a mask. On the peak of the flu, so when they go
it's very normal
abroad.
In Asia. It's very normal thing in Asia. Like no problem for people here to wear masks.
Yeah, the
Unlike
mask,
you.
I think that is not. Yeah, for us is strange. Since 3 weeks ago, I was one of the few guys wearing a mask in the underground Moscow. So I was seen as what's going on. I mean, a stranger, no?
Yeah,
But
I mean, it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do, and you never know if any of us can be a carrier. So
yeah, of course.
let's act responsibly.
Yeah. Valentina, thank you so much. I hope to see you in Moscow because it's very difficult to come to China nowadays for me because I have other plans. First of all, to jump back to my lovely country after this crisis. But I hope to see you soon in Moscow. We can share maybe make another podcast face to face.
Great idea.
Without mask.
Yeah, hopefully.
So, thank you everybody. Thank you for. We have few comments, but of course I didn't share the comment because like on the topic that we were already discussing. So see you in the next days. We have other guests, not only foreign but also like let me say from my Italian followers, Italian. So in Italian language, we will continue with the series Parliamo con. So some interesting themes: marketing, tourism, but also politics and economics as in the last days. So see you to the next episode. Bye.
Thanks everyone for watching. Bye-bye.